You know what confuses people the most about loners? It's not that they disappear. It's not that they go quiet. It's not even that they walk away without explaining. It's this: they don't miss you. And that's the part nobody wants to talk about, because missing someone is supposed to be proof that you cared. It's supposed to mean the relationship mattered. So when a loner cuts someone off and doesn't look back, people assume something is wrong with them. Cold, detached, emotionless. But here's the truth that feels uncomfortable to hear. Loners don't miss people after cutting them off because emotionally, they already lost them a long time ago. See, most people leave relationships when the pain becomes unbearable. Loners leave when the pattern becomes clear. They don't walk away in the heat of emotion. They walk away after months, sometimes years, of quiet observation. They notice how often they're the one reaching out. They notice how often they're misunderstood. They notice how often their presence is taken for granted. They notice how easily their silence is ignored, but their absence suddenly becomes a problem. And while other people are busy arguing, explaining, blaming, or hoping things will magically change, the loner is doing something far more dangerous. They are emotionally detaching in silence. By the time they cut you off, they've already mourned the relationship. They've already asked themselves if they're asking for too much. They've already tried giving less, caring less, expecting less. They've already felt lonely while still being connected to you. And loneliness inside a relationship does something brutal to the human mind. It teaches you that being alone is less painful than being unseen. This is where people get it wrong. Loners don't stop missing people because they lack emotion. They stop missing people because they exhausted their emotion trying to be understood by someone who never really saw them. Psychology calls this emotional disengagement, but that word doesn't capture how slow and painful the process actually is. It's not a switch, it's erosion. Each ignored message, each dismissed feeling, each moment where they realized they were giving more than they were receiving. Each time they lowered their expectations just to keep the peace. Until one day, something clicks. Not in an explosive way, in a quiet, irreversible way. They stop reaching. They stop explaining. They stop hoping. And when they finally leave, it looks sudden to everyone else. But to them, it feels overdue. That's why they don't miss people after cutting them off. Because missing someone requires believing that connection still exists. And for loners, that connection died long before the goodbye. They didn't leave because they stopped caring. They left because caring alone was slowly destroying them. And here's the part people never want to admit. The loner didn't lose you. They finally chose themselves. To understand why loners don't miss people after cutting them off, you have to go further back than the relationship itself. You have to go back to where their nervous system learned one core rule early in life. Do not rely on anyone emotionally, because when loners detach, they are not learning something new, they are returning to something familiar. For many loners, emotional distance did not begin in adulthood. It began in environments where feelings were inconvenient, misunderstood, or quietly dismissed. Not always with shouting, not always with cruelty, sometimes with silence. Sometimes with adults who were physically present but emotionally unreachable. So the loner learned something dangerous very early. That closeness does not guarantee safety. That explaining yourself does not guarantee understanding. That being honest does not guarantee care. And when those lessons repeat enough times, the mind adapts. It doesn't shut down emotions, it reroutes them inward. That's why loners become observers. They watch instead of react. They analyze instead of confront. They feel deeply, but quietly. And over time, this creates a very specific emotional skill set. They can endure disconnection without panicking. They can sit with emptiness without scrambling to fill it. They can walk away without begging to be chosen. And the answer is simple but uncomfortable. Loners already learned how to survive emotional absence before you ever entered their life. Another truth people don't like hearing is this: loners don't miss people who made them feel emotionally alone while being physically present. They don't miss conversations where they weren't heard. They don't miss connections that required them to shrink. They don't miss relationships where their loyalty was taken for granted. What they actually miss, sometimes quietly, is who they were before they started explaining themselves too much. Psychologically, once a loner decides to cut someone off, the bond doesn't snap, it dissolves. And that dissolution happens through repetition. Every disappointment reinforces the same internal conclusion: this connection costs more than it gives. And here's where guilt usually dies. Loners don't feel guilty after cutting someone off because guilt comes from doubting your decision, and loners don't doubt decisions they reach slowly, painfully, and logically. They don't cut people off impulsively. They cut people off when staying becomes self-betrayal. That's why there's no dramatic goodbye, no long message, no closure speech. Because closure already happened internally. The final act is just execution, not emotion. And this is why people who were cut off often feel confused, angry, or shocked, because they experienced the relationship in real time. The loner experienced it in delayed emotional processing. While you thought things were fine, they were already withdrawing. While you thought silence meant peace, they were preparing distance. When loners leave, it's not because they stopped caring. It's because they learned that caring without reciprocity is self-destruction. And once they taste the quiet that comes after cutting someone off, something changes permanently. The nervous system relaxes, the constant vigilance disappears, the emotional noise stops, and that peace becomes addictive. That's why they don't miss people who disrupted it. They don't miss chaos, they don't miss inconsistency, they don't miss conditional attention, they miss clarity. And clarity is exactly what cutting off gave them. This is where loners get misunderstood the most, because once they cut someone off, they don't circle back, they don't check in. They don't reopen doors they closed on purpose. And to people on the outside, that looks cruel. But here's the truth most people can't face. Loners don't return because returning would mean lying to themselves. See, loners don't leave because of one bad moment. They leave because the relationship forced them into a role they never asked to play. The one who understands more, the one who tolerates more, the one who explains themselves more, the one who carries emotional weight quietly while everyone else stays comfortable. So when they finally leave, it's not an emotional decision, it's an ethical one. They're not choosing distance from you, they're choosing alignment with themselves. And once that happens, something irreversible takes place in the mind. That's why they don't miss you. Because missing someone implies regret, and loners don't regret decisions that restored their peace. This is also why people often react aggressively when a loner cuts them off. Anger, blame, character attacks, sudden guilt tripping. Not because they lost the loner, but because they lost access. Access to attention, access to emotional labor, access to someone who listened without demanding the same in return. And that loss threatens people who rely on others to regulate their emotions. Loners, on the other hand, learned long ago how to self-regulate. They don't need constant reassurance. They don't need frequent contact. They don't need emotional noise to feel alive. So when they leave, they don't fall apart. They stabilize. This is why loners are often described as cold after cutting people off. Not because they lack emotion, but because they finally stopped leaking it. And here's the part that hits hardest. Loners rarely explain themselves when they leave because experience taught them that explanations don't change behavior. They only create arguments. Defensiveness, promises that arrive too late. So instead of begging to be understood, they choose silence. And silence feels brutal to people who never listened when it mattered. The loner's absence becomes the message, and once that absence brings peace, clarity, and emotional balance, there's no incentive to return, no longing, no nostalgia. Just relief. That's why loners don't miss people after cutting them off. They don't romanticize the past. They remember exactly how it felt to be there, and they refuse to go back to a place where they had to disappear just to stay. Here's what almost nobody tells loners, and what society refuses to admit. This pattern is not a flaw. It is intelligence shaped by experience. Loners are not broken people who failed at connection. They are people who learned, through repetition, what connection actually costs them. They learned that access to their inner world is expensive, that not everyone deserves it, that giving endlessly does not guarantee being valued, and that staying too long in the wrong relationships slowly erodes self-respect. So when they cut people off and don't miss them, it isn't emotional numbness, it's emotional clarity. Psychologically, this is called boundary consolidation, but that term doesn't capture the gravity of what's happening. This is a person choosing self-loyalty over familiarity, peace over chaos, truth over attachment. Loners don't leave because they hate people. They leave because they finally understand themselves. They understand that longing for someone who consistently made them feel unseen is not love, it's conditioning. They understand that missing people who drain them is not loyalty, it's fear of emptiness. And they understand that silence, when chosen, is not loneliness, it's recovery. This is why once a loner cuts someone off, they rarely go back, not because they think they're better than others, but because going back would mean abandoning the one relationship they fought hardest to build, the relationship with themselves. And here's the part that flips the narrative completely. Loners don't stop caring after cutting people off. They redirect that care. They invest it inward, into their routines, their inner world, their values, their sense of identity. They stop negotiating their worth through other people's attention. That's why they grow quieter but stronger. Why they become harder to manipulate. Why they no longer chase closure or validation. They've already closed the door internally. And yes, sometimes there is grief, not for the person, but for the version of themselves that kept trying long after they should have stopped. But grief passes, peace stays. If this feels familiar, if this feels like it's describing you with uncomfortable accuracy, understand this. You are not heartless. You are not cold. You are not emotionally unavailable. You are emotionally selective. You learned what too much access cost you, and you decided to stop paying that price. That doesn't make you cruel. It makes you conscious. And once someone reaches that level of awareness, they don't miss people who taught them how painful misunderstanding can be. They remember, they learn, and they move forward lighter. So if you've ever cut someone off and felt calm instead of regret, don't let anyone shame you for it. That calm wasn't emptiness, it was alignment, and alignment doesn't beg. It doesn't explain, it doesn't look back, it simply continues.